Good afternoon. I'm Hamid Farid. Before I get started, I want to get to know each of you. What's your name?
Ryan.
Hi, Ryan. How are you?
Good.
How about you?
Holly.
Hi, Holly. How are you? So today I want to talk to you about the future of air traffic control funding and what it really means to each one of you. I know it's important to each one of you as you travel. We travel a lot as a nation. We use air travel as a primary means of getting around the country. And in some parts of the country, it actually is a lifeblood of getting from one place to another, such as the Hawaiian Islands or Alaska. But before we get started, let's talk about delays. On our way here to Paris, where we're actually filming this, we had to wait in lines, didn't we? And it was frustrating. We had to stand in line for security, then we had to stand in line to board, and then we had to stand in line to get out, stand in line to get ready to take off, and then get back to the gate. It just seems like we're constantly waiting. We're impatient people. We don't like waiting. I know I don't like waiting. Do you guys like waiting? No, no one likes waiting. So really, why should we be concerned about the future of air traffic control funding? What does it mean to each one of you? What does it mean to us as a country? And having a stable and predictable funding going into the future. So in 2013, the chair of the Senate Transportation Committee, Senator Rockefeller, said the following: "Unlike other transportation systems, we have a comprehensive plan to move our aviation system into the 21st century. But the erosion of the FAA's budget threatens our ability to make continuous improvement to aviation safety that we have made since the Wright brothers." So really, what's the problem? The lack of a reliable, stable, predictable funding stream for the FAA has created a problem that affects the modernization, it affects hiring, it affects maintenance, and so forth. So how do we ensure the federal government provides the Federal Aviation Administration with stable and predictable funding so we can continue to be operating at the highest levels of safety while also modernizing the system and also reducing delays? So we're going to discuss two possible options. While there are many options that we could explore in the span of 10 minutes, we're only going to look at these two options. One option is a status quo, which means no change, keep air traffic control system within the government, but however, exempted from sequestration cuts and further budget cuts. Now you may ask, what are sequestration cuts? Okay, so the sequestration law came about as a result of budget negotiators not being able to come to an agreement to raise the debt ceiling. So sequestration law was brought about as a result of that failure to come to an agreement. And it indiscriminately cut the budget of every government branch other than non-defense spending. Option two that we'll discuss today is privatizing the air traffic control system, which of course then would not be subject to the budget appropriations and authorization process. It would be self-sustained. But before we do that, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about air traffic control. What do? Their primary job is to prevent collisions between aircraft, whether it's on the ground or whether it's in the air. Where do they work? Well, they work at air traffic control towers, which of course you see at the airports, and then they work in radar approach control rooms and radar en route centers. Who do they work for? Well, they work for the federal government. They work for the Federal Aviation Administration, which is a branch of the Department of Transportation. In discussing option one, the Department of Transportation Inspector General testified before Congress in May of 2017, and he said the following: "Since 1958, the FAA has overseen the safe operation of the busiest, most complex air traffic system in the world." In addition to the Department of Transportation Inspector General, the union representing air traffic controllers, the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, also testified. Its president, Paul Rinaldi, said the following: "The U.S. national airspace system is the safest, most efficient, most complex, and most diverse system in the world." In addition, in the June 2013 issue of Congressional Digest, the National Transportation Safety Board said the following. The National Transportation Safety Board reports that air travel today is safer than ever. So clearly, based on the testimony before Congress and what the National Transportation Safety Board has stated, we clearly have the most complex, safest, and most efficient system in the world. Why would we want to change something that appears to be working? Why would we want to risk that? And that's what some of the proponents say. Now, some of the problems with the status quo, as we mentioned, if there's no agreement on exempting the Federal Aviation Administration from the budget cuts and sequestration, then stable and predictable funding would be affected. Anytime you have stop and go funding for the Federal Aviation Administration, it impacts long-term modernization projects. It impacts the upkeep of equipment. It impacts hiring. The president of the National Air Traffic Controllers Association actually testified before Congress and said the stop and go funding has affected the hiring to the point where the air traffic controllers are at a 28-year low in the number of certified air traffic controllers, and 1/4 of the certified air traffic controllers are actually eligible to retire. So this stop and go funding has had dire consequences on the air traffic control system. Option 2 is privatizing the air traffic control system. This is really not something that's new. It's been discussed since the 1980s, mainly by the airlines. They have been the big proponents of this change, but really what it does do is it allows this Air Traffic Control Corporation to be separate and distinct from the federal government budget process, not subject to their procurement rules, not subject to their appropriations and authorizations process, and it actually allows them to be able to borrow if they need to be able to plan for modernization projects or replacing aging infrastructure. Why do we need to change? National Air Traffic Controllers President Paul Rinaldi, as part of his testimony, said the following on why we must have change. Without change, our nation risks falling behind the rest of the world and losing its status as a global leader in aviation. Globalization and innovation are driving dramatic changes in the aviation industry, and sadly, America's current structure is not keeping up. In June of 2017, the Associated Press reported the following. Proponents of privatization said the procurement process for the FAA is cumbersome. By the time new technology is brought on board, it's already out of date. These delays in acquiring new technology is actually affecting the airlines now, where they're losing billions of dollars in equipping their aircraft yearly and not being able to use the new technology. Certainly a corporation is free from the government regulations, is free from the bureaucracy, and it has self-sustained funding. So that's some of the benefits that the Associated Press reported. Now, some of the challenges with a privatized air traffic control system certainly is that you would have the airlines having a major stake in the corporation. And we've all seen some of the problems that the airlines have had. You know, they've had massive computer failures. They've had serious problems with customer service. So we've seen how some of the corporations, these large airline corporates, have worked within the system. And as part of the privatized air traffic control system, there would be user fees. There's definitely some fear by small operators, whether it's airports, whether it's private operators of small aircraft, whether it's business aircraft. There's concern that when you have a board that is dominated by the airlines, that service will suffer while their prices will go up. So let's summarize. Option 1, status quo. ATC stays within the government, but is exempted from the sequestration cuts and the budget cuts. Option 2, privatize the air traffic control system, self-sustained funding, free from government regulations and appropriations and authorizations process. Bottom line is, we need change. Status quo and doing nothing is really not acceptable. Are there any questions?
So what do you think is the better option then, of the two that you
So of the two we discussed, certainly the option that allows the Federal Aviation Administration greater flexibility in being able to plan for the future, not just with stable and predictable funding, but also being free of the bureaucracy and procurement process of being part of the federal government, that appears to be the most appealing on trying to plan for the future and trying to keep the U.S. air traffic control system the #1 system in the world. Any questions?
Which method do air traffic controllers prefer?
Okay, that's a good question. Um, the president of the National Air Traffic Controllers testified before Congress. He was actually asked this question, and he said the air traffic controllers really do not have a preference. They would like to see the details in any legislation, but of primary concern to them is stable and predictable funding. They realize the problems that we've experienced by this stop and go funding, by this government shutdowns, by these interruptions to long-term modernization projects, not being able to replace aging infrastructure, not being able to hire. So they're saying that the devil's really going to be in the details of whatever legislation is put forward, but there needs to be stable and predictable funding. There has to be access to all, not just to the large airlines, but also the small operators. There needs to be access to the small airports. There should not be significant increases to these operators that enjoy the air traffic system. Certainly, safety needs to be the #1 priority of this new corporation. And lastly, the air traffic controllers would like the benefits of being a labor organization and having the full rights and benefits to collective bargaining. Thank you so much.